Harvey Korman was making $25,000 per episode on The Carol Burnett Show in 1973. That's when everything went wrong. He started ignoring Tim Conway's jokes, ruining scenes, and acting completely out of control. Carol watched her own show falling apart because of one man's behavior. After Harvey slammed a door in her face, Carol picked up the phone and made a call that changed everything. She fired him immediately. But what Harvey did next was even more surprising. The real story will shock you. Carol Burnett was born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas. Her father worked at a movie theater, and her mother wrote publicity for studios. Both of them wanted to be writers, but they drank too much, and that ruined everything. By the time Carol was just a few years old, their drinking had caused fights, separations, and deep poverty. Her father became jobless and disappeared for long periods. He died young in 1954 at just 46, alone in a charity hospital. Her mother also died at 46 in 1958 after years of drinking and angry outbursts. Carol remembered how her mom would scream at her when drunk, blaming her for things that made no sense. Her dad, even when drunk, was gentle. The chaos at home scared her, but she used it to fuel her imagination. She later said that the pain made her funny. In 1986, she wrote how her mother once told her, "You can always write, no matter what you look like." It hurt, but Carol turned that pain into the sketches that made people laugh. When Carol was 7, in 1940, she and her grandmother moved to a crumbling Hollywood boarding house on Yucca Street. It was just one room with no kitchen or bathroom, and they had to use a toilet down the hall. They survived on $30 a month from welfare, sometimes stealing toilet paper from theaters because they couldn't afford basics. Carol slept on a small couch until she was 21. They hung clothes from the shower rod because there was no closet. But even with all that, her grandmother, who loved music, sang with her at the kitchen table. That's where Carol's voice developed. By age 9, she could do her famous Tarzan yell. The other people in the building were also poor dreamers, actors, writers, and musicians. So even in misery, there was a strange kind of hope. Her parents' divorce came in the late 1930s, when she was around 5. Her father vanished completely, and her mother disappeared for days on drinking binges. Carol was left mostly with her grandmother. Lonely, she began making up stories. She even invented a twin sister named Karen in 2nd grade, around 1940. She'd change clothes, climb the fire escape, and act like Karen was real. The game wore her out, so she let Karen disappear. With no toys, she used movies to escape. A few years later, in 1944, her mother had another daughter, Chrissy, from an affair, adding even more instability. When Carol graduated from Hollywood High in 1951, she used a mysterious $50 donation to enroll at UCLA. She feared ending up like her mother, but she was determined to break the pattern. Years later, those messy memories became hilarious sketches on her show. When she was about 12, sometime around 1945, something happened that stayed with her forever. She found her mother passed out on Hollywood Boulevard, mumbling and completely out of it. People walked by, staring. That moment haunted her. Her mom kept trying to get sober, but it never lasted. She'd scream, break bottles, and accuse Carol of things that weren't real. Carol testified in court in 1981, calling her mother a hostile drunk. Later, her own daughter Erin also battled addiction. After 8 stints in treatment and a suicide attempt in 2020, Carol had to take custody of her grandson Dylan. It was like watching history repeat itself. In her 1986 memoir, she talked about these patterns and how they made her fight harder to stay away from alcohol and use her pain in her comedy. During World War II, between 1941 and 1945, Carol and her grandmother were dirt poor. they'd scavenge for food and survive on government cheese. Movies became their only escape. For 25 cents, they watched films like Gone with the Wind again and again. Carol especially loved pretending to be Scarlett O'Hara. She'd watch 3 movies a week and dream of being on stage. They'd sometimes bring home toilet paper from the theaters because they couldn't afford their own. During the 1943 blackouts, they'd sit in the dark singing harmonies to calm their nerves. Her Broadway dreams began during those years. In 1954, someone she barely knew gave her a $1,000 loan to move to New York. She left during Hurricane Carol, a storm as wild as her life, and that money changed everything. Carol went to Hollywood High School in the late 1940s and finished in 1951. She was in school plays, despite being bullied because of her second-hand clothes and poor living situation. One time, a teacher saw her act and encouraged her. That changed her. She stopped being shy and started believing she could make people laugh. She and her grandmother still lived in one room, still poor, still dreaming. Movies were their escape every week. The characters she later created on her show all came from these early days of pain mixed with humor. When Carol was 16, around 1949, she discovered something that shook her. Her mother had lied about her age to keep getting welfare checks. This came out during a heated argument in their tiny room. It made Carol feel like she couldn't trust anyone. Their $50 monthly relief checks kept them afloat, but everything was held together by lies and fear. She still pushed forward, applying for scholarships and trying to hold on to hope. She graduated with honors and focused on journalism. Years later, she wrote about this betrayal in her book, One More Time. It hurt deeply, but it gave her fire. In the early 1950s, Carol worked at the Warner Brothers Theater as an usher, making just 65 cents an hour. She and her grandmother lived in a $30-a-month studio and barely got by. After her shifts, she'd sneak back into the theater and watch Lucille Ball's comedies. She memorized them. She studied Lucy's timing and moves, learning how to be funny without saying a word. She got caught once for letting someone see a movie twice, but instead of being scared, she charmed her way out. Those little jobs, earning maybe $20 a week, paid for her tuition at UCLA. But more than money, they gave her a way out. Years later, she worked with Lucille Ball on TV. The girl who once stole toilet paper now made people laugh alongside her idol. In 1951, she started at UCLA on a journalism scholarship. Tuition was only $43 a semester, and that mystery $50 donation helped her afford it. At first, she was quiet and unsure. Then, in 1952, a professor saw her perform in class and told her she belonged in theater. That moment changed everything. She switched majors and found her voice. During one party in 1954, she did a skit about stuffing cookies in her purse, and someone offered her a $1,000 loan. No strings attached. She left UCLA with an associate in arts degree, having starred in school productions like South Pacific. Her notes from 1953 still exist, showing how quickly she grew from scared to fearless. Even during those years, life was still hard. From the 1940s into the 1950s, Carol and her grandmother stole toilet paper from theaters because they couldn't afford it. Their $50 welfare checks didn't cover food or hygiene. At the Warner Brothers Theater, Carol would sneak rolls into her bag. If caught, she risked a $100 fine. They also ate leftover chicken and shared scraps. It was humiliating, but it made her understand people. Later, she turned those memories into sketches, like her 1970s toilet paper commercial parody. What was once shame became gold. In 1954, she left UCLA and moved to New York using that anonymous $1,000 loan. She stayed first at the Algonquin Hotel for $9 a night. but the money ran out fast. She found a spot at the Rehearsal Club, a cheap boarding house for women trying to make it in show business. Rent was $18 a week and included food. She worked small jobs like being a hat check girl and auditioned whenever she could. She called home crying more than once, but when she heard a news report about Hurricane Carol, she took it as a sign to keep going. In 1955, she got her first break as a ventriloquist dummy's girlfriend on The Paul Winchell and Jerry Mahoney Show. That same year, she performed in the Rehearsal Club Revue, and stars like Celeste Holm came to watch. It was a small light in the darkness. But it didn't get easy right away. The mid-1950s were filled with rejections. Directors said she was too plain, not glamorous enough. She felt like a failure, and even thought of ending it all. In 1958, her mother died, and it hit her hard. But she kept performing. One song parody she wrote, "I Made a Fool of Myself Over John Foster Dulles," went viral before viral was a thing. It played on The Tonight Show and The Ed Sullivan Show, and even Dulles himself laughed about it. That moment pulled her back from quitting. In 1960, talent scouts saw her at the Blue Angel Supper Club and opened doors that would change everything. Her real breakthrough didn't come in 1955, as some people think. It was in 1959 with Once Upon a Mattress. She played Princess Winifred, and her physical comedy, climbing ladders, doing somersaults, got her called a clown princess. The off-Broadway show ran for 244 performances and earned over $500,000. It moved to Broadway, and in 1960, she was nominated for a Tony. Later, she did TV versions in 1964, 1972, and even 2005. That one show proved she belonged. During her New York years, she lived on $18 a week. In 1957, she and her roommate split tips at a tea room just to get by. One day, she fainted during rehearsal from hunger. A doctor told her she wasn't getting enough protein. It reminded her of being 7 again, poor, hungry, and scared. But she kept going. That same pain helped her create The Carol Burnett Show, which aired from 1967 to 1978 and won 25 Emmys. In 1968, CBS reported that 10 million Americans were malnourished. Carol knew what that felt like. She had lived it. By 1957, she had started appearing on TV shows. She was on The Tonight Show and The Ed Sullivan Show, where she performed her parody songs. Her impressions drew in 20 million viewers per episode. In 1959, she joined The Gary Moore Show and appeared over 300 times. Carol Burnett was just 26 when everything changed. It was May 11, 1959, and she stepped onto the stage of the Phoenix Theater, playing Princess Winifred in a musical comedy called Once Upon a Mattress. It started off-Broadway, but her performance was so wild and full of energy that people couldn't stop talking. Soon, the show transferred to the Alvin Theater on Broadway and kept going for 470 performances. Nobody expected this unknown girl to shine like that, but Carol's charm was impossible to ignore. That same year, she quietly repaid a mysterious $1,000 loan she had once used to make it to New York. She had promised to do so, and she kept her word. She was poor, juggling small TV roles on the side, but this role put her name in the spotlight and even got her nominated for a Tony Award. Behind the curtain, though, things weren't always joyful. Carol clashed with the director, George Abbott, who didn't like how she kept adding her own style to the performance. She'd exaggerate scenes, especially her swampy, messy entrance, and that made him furious. They argued a lot, and at one point, she almost got fired. The show moved between 4 different theaters, and eventually, in June 1960, Carol was replaced by Ann B. Davis, after more than a year in the role. It wasn't a clean goodbye. She was exhausted, underpaid, and surrounded by constant changes in cast and crew. But through that chaos, Carol learned how harsh Broadway could be, and she also discovered her own voice. That voice got louder in 1962, when she won her first Emmy for her work on The Gary Moore Show. She had been part of the show since 1959, doing weekly sketches that made millions laugh. One of those characters, a sad but sweet cleaner called the Charwoman, was inspired by Carol's own grandmother, who used to clean while dreaming of better days. The character became so loved that she played it in over 30 episodes. Around the same time, Carol also appeared with Julie Andrews in a musical special called Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall, which won even more awards. But behind the spotlight, she was hurting. Her first marriage had ended that year, and she had quietly gone through a painful miscarriage in 1965. Still, she kept performing, even when her heart was breaking. In 1964, she made her big film debut in a comedy called Who's Minding the Store with Jerry Lewis. She played the quirky love interest, but despite how well the movie did at the box office, she was only paid $10,000. Jerry Lewis earned over 10 times that. This unfairness burned into Carol's memory and pushed her to fight for women's rights in show business. She had just married producer Joe Hamilton the year before, and while she was making people laugh, she was also dealing with a system that didn't treat women equally. Her first marriage had been difficult. She married Don Saroyan in 1955 when both were young and broke in New York. They shared the $1,000 loan that had brought her to the city, but as Carol's fame grew, Don grew bitter. By 1960, things were falling apart. He was directing small, forgettable films while she was becoming a star. They separated and officially divorced in 1962. That breakup was painful and public. Carol had to hide food in her bag just to get by, but she picked herself up again, and within a year, she married Joe Hamilton, the man who would help shape her biggest career move. That move happened on September 11, 1967. Carol shocked CBS executives by demanding her own variety show. She had found an old clause in her contract from 1962 that said the network owed her a show or $250,000. They didn't believe she could carry a variety show. It was seen as a man's game, but Carol stood firm. She got her show and made it her own. Every week, she answered questions from the audience and acted in funny sketches that made fun of soap operas and everyday life. People loved it. The show averaged 18 million viewers during the first season. But it wasn't easy. CBS tried to push it into bad time slots, hoping it would fail. They didn't like her style and even suggested she make it sexier. One executive told her to wear shorter skirts or add more spice, but she refused. She nearly quit on October 15, 1967, but fan letters poured in, over 1,200 every week, and that gave her strength to keep going. The show had problems early on. Ratings were low, budgets got cut, and production was delayed for 3 months in 1968 due to strikes. But Carol didn't give up. She even used her own money to give the crew $500 bonuses when they weren't getting paid. By 1969, the audience had grown to over 20 million. She had proved everyone wrong, especially in a world where only 2 shows led by women even survived that decade. Carol carefully picked her cast, and in 1967, she took a chance on a 19-year-old fan named Vicki Lawrence. Vicki looked a bit like Carol, and that worked perfectly for sketches about a loud, dysfunctional family. Over time, the cast grew with actors like Lyle Waggoner and Tim Conway. Tim caused chaos by going off script so often that tapings ran late because everyone was laughing too hard. Harvey Korman was another key actor, though he often argued on set. Carol tried to keep peace by offering small bonuses to keep spirits high. That chemistry paid off. The cast won multiple awards, even as tensions simmered below the surface. Big stars came to the show, too. In 1967, Durwood Kirby showed up and tried to change the script, causing a 2-hour standoff until Carol turned the moment into a hilarious improv bit. Jerry Lewis came in 1969 and went completely off script for 10 minutes, nearly ruining the taping. But Carol always found a way to turn mess into magic. Her famous curtain rod dress from the 1976 Gone with the Wind parody became legendary, and it had been put together in just 2 days. Some guests, especially women, were paid less, and by 1972, the show was facing lawsuits over credit and rights. But the show kept going strong. By 1969, during season 3, the show finally won an Emmy for Outstanding Variety Series. But Carol still wasn't allowed to direct. Executives thought women couldn't manage a crew of 50 men. She directed 3 episodes anyway, using fake names. That same year, CBS offered her $1 million just to quit because they were afraid her success was shaking up old ideas. She refused. The show kept growing and went on to win 25 Emmys before it ended in 1978. During that time, Carol was raising her daughter Carrie, born in 1963, while still fighting sexism and leading one of the most beloved shows on television. Her marriage to Joe Hamilton, the man who helped build her show, started like a dream. They had 3 daughters together, Carrie in 1963, Jody in 1967, and Erin in 1968. But over time, Hamilton's drinking became a serious problem. Carol had grown up with alcoholic parents. Her father was sweet but broken by alcohol, and her mother became cruel when she drank. Living through that again, this time with her husband, was like reliving her worst childhood memories. By the late 1970s, their marriage was falling apart. They divorced in 1984. He had been unfaithful, according to rumors, and she was left to raise the girls alone while managing her show and public life. In 1981, the National Enquirer falsely accused her of being drunk in public. She sued and won $1.6 million, which she donated to charity. That victory wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. In 1976, her daughter Carrie was only 13 when she began using drugs: weed, quaaludes, cocaine. Carol had to fight for her child. She sent her to rehab 3 times by the time she turned 17. One doctor compared Carrie's life to Janis Joplin's, warning her of a deadly future. That moment turned everything. Carrie sobered up in 1980 and later co-wrote plays with her mom, turning pain into something beautiful. But tragedy struck again. In 2002, Carrie died of cancer at only 38. She had started smoking as a teenager, and the disease spread fast, first to her lungs, then her brain. Carol was shattered. They had just finished writing a play together based on Carol's childhood, and it premiered after Carrie's death. Carol later wrote a book called Carrie and Me, sharing their letters and the deep love they shared. The grief was unbearable, but she found a way to turn that grief into light for others. It was 1973, and something unexpected shook one of America's most beloved comedy shows. Behind the scenes of the Carol Burnett Show, Harvey Korman, usually the funny, charming regular, started acting like a completely different person. He showed up to a rehearsal in full Elvis Presley costume, but there was no humor in his mood. He snapped at his co-stars. He ignored Tim Conway's ad-libs, ruined scenes, and even made the guest star Petula Clark feel so uncomfortable, she almost left. Crew members whispered that he was out of control. Carol Burnett, who had always led with kindness, couldn't believe what she was seeing. She later admitted that his behavior made her mess up her own lines several times during filming. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon in November, after another tense rehearsal, Carol walked straight to Harvey's dressing room. Still wearing his Elvis wig and jumpsuit, Harvey wasn't in the mood to talk. He told her to mind her own business. She stood her ground, trying to explain how his attitude was hurting everyone. But Harvey didn't care. He slammed the door in her face, hard enough that props nearby rattled. People down the hall heard it. Carol just stood there, stunned. This was the first real confrontation she'd ever had like that in 7 seasons. She didn't wait. Right after lunch, she picked up the phone and called Harvey's agent. Calmly but firmly, she said he was fired, effective immediately after that night's taping. She explained that being rude to guests and cast members wasn't just unprofessional, it went against everything the show stood for. Harvey, who was making $25,000 per episode at the time, was suddenly out. He had been part of the show since 1967, but now it was over. But not for long. After the show finished taping that same night, Carol gave him the news in person. And something changed. Harvey's face dropped. The man who had just slammed the door on her a few hours earlier now apologized, almost panicking. He asked what he could do to stay. Carol gave him a challenge. Come back next Monday, smiling, whistling, and treating everyone with kindness. She didn't think he'd do it. But Monday arrived, and Harvey didn't just walk in. He skipped down the hallway, danced into her office, and whistled like a schoolboy. He gave her a big hug, and just like that, they were back. The moment became a funny memory between them. Carol even put up a plaque on his dressing room that read, "Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky," a little joke to remind him. It worked. The mood on set lifted. People smiled more. Arguments stopped. Harvey himself later said the firing changed him. He stayed on the show for 5 more years, and the sketches only got better. In 1982, a few years after the show ended, Carol took on a role nobody expected. She became Miss Hannigan, the mean, drunk head of the orphanage in Annie. It was a huge shift from her lovable TV character, and people were shocked at how well she pulled it off. What most didn't know was that during filming, she'd just had jaw surgery. Her face was still swollen, and she could barely talk. But she showed up anyway, bandages and all, delivering her lines while trying not to laugh through the pain. The movie made over $57 million, and Carol walked away with a Golden Globe nomination. Years later, in 1990, she made headlines again, this time in court. A gossip column from 1976 had written that she'd gotten drunk at a restaurant and argued with Henry Kissinger. None of it was true. Carol didn't even drink, and she'd spent her life speaking out against alcoholism, so she sued the National Enquirer. It was risky. Few celebrities had ever won such cases, but she did. A jury awarded her $1.6 million, though it was reduced later in settlement. The case changed how tabloids wrote about stars. Carol didn't just defend her name, she made history. She returned to Broadway in 2003 with Moon Over Buffalo, getting a Tony nomination after 30 years away. But the stage lights didn't tell the full story. Back in the 1980s, she had suffered from a brutal jaw disorder that left her in constant pain. At one point, she could only drink through a straw. That pain had lingered for years, but somehow, she never let it show on stage. She kept tumbling, laughing, and making people smile, even when it hurt to move her jaw. In 1986, she released her first memoir, One More Time, and, for the first time, the world saw what she had gone through. She spoke about growing up in poverty during the Great Depression. Her father died in 1954, and her childhood had been filled with loneliness and neglect. She and her grandmother scraped by in a tiny apartment. She sometimes had to steal toilet paper, but the movies gave her escape. Sitting in those dark theaters, she found her dream. Years later, that dream brought her 25 Emmy Awards. In 2001, at age 68, Carol surprised everyone again. She married Brian Miller, a musician 23 years younger. They had met in 1993 at one of her performances, and even though gossip columns had a field day with the age gap, the two proved them all wrong. But just 2 months after the wedding, tragedy hit. Her daughter Carrie passed away from lung cancer at only 38. Carol was devastated, but Brian supported her, pushing her to finish a play they had been working on with Carrie. That kind of love helped her survive the worst moment of her life. Then in 2016, at 82, she stood on stage at the Screen Actors Guild Awards. Tina Fey and Amy Poehler introduced her, calling her a trailblazer. Carol received the Life Achievement Award, and during her speech, she spoke about being told early in her career that women weren't funny. But she'd proven them wrong, time and again. She had made millions laugh, built a $45 million fortune, and changed comedy forever. When she tugged her ear, her secret signal to her grandmother, it felt like a quiet thank you to where it all started. By 2023, at age 90, she was still surprising people. In a rare interview, she admitted that one of her biggest regrets was not taking on more dramatic roles. She had turned down Terms of Endearment in 1983, a film that went on to win the Oscar. She felt typecast by comedy and wished she had broken out more often. In Better Call Saul, she finally got the chance to play something dark and serious, and it reminded everyone what she could do. And in her quiet Palm Springs home, surrounded by memories, she kept working. Her 2016 memoir about the Carol Burnett Show became a New York Times bestseller. She watched every episode again, fast-forwarding through parts, laughing at others, and writing it all down. The book earned her a Grammy for the audiobook. She shared behind-the-scenes chaos, costume secrets, and even one disturbing story about a guest who stormed off the set while high. That house, that quiet place, became her studio. Even in her 90s, she was producing new shows, still chasing the next story.